Saat Farkı'ndan merhabalar. Her hafta farklı ülkelerden yabancı konuklarla bölgesel ve küresel gelişmelere dair farklı perspektiflere yer vermeye çalışıyoruz. Bu haftada son haftalarda olduğu gibi yine Rusya'nın Ukrayna işgalini konuşacağız. Ancak bu kez odağımızda enerji olacak. Rusya'ya enerji alanında uygulanan yaptırımların geleceğini, Rusya'ya son derece bağımlı olan Batı'nın, Avrupa'nın alternatif gaz arayışlarını ve Türkiye'nin enerji jeopolitiğindeki konumunu, yerini konuşacağız. Türkiye'de yaşayan Amerikalı enerji uzmanı Dr. Bowlus bizlerle bu hafta. Kendisi Georgetown Üniversitesi'nde enerji üzerine doktorasını yaptı ve halihazırda İstanbul'da Kadir Has Üniversitesi'nde de araştırmalarına devam ediyor. Orada dersler de veriyor. Hoş geldin John.
Hoş bulduk. Sağ ol.
Thank you very much for joining my program.
Thank you.
Seni burada görmek çok güzel.
Çok mersi, çok mersi.
John, I want to start, we will come to energy. We will talk about energy. That's your area of expertise. But let me start with U.S. Foreign policy, first of all.
Okay.
U.S. policy of this Russia-Ukraine crisis, Russian invasion of Ukraine. How do you see the U.S. Handling of the crisis between Russia and Ukraine from the very beginning? Enough sanctions have been imposed, do you think? And also, I want to ask you, according to some polls, a majority of Americans think Putin would not have invaded Ukraine if Trump were still president. Do you agree?
That's a provocative and good question to start with. I'll say that I do agree with that supposition. You know, of course, we don't know. Okay, so with Trump had stated even that his goal was to withdraw the United States from NATO during his first term. So we can only predict that he would have continued to have gone on with that policy as he had in the first administration of kind of alienating NATO, kind of antagonizing the Germans for, you know, working with the Russians in natural gas, for instance. Who knows what would have happened? The United States might not even be in NATO anymore if Trump had won, because that was his intended goal.
Right.
As for what the Biden administration is doing right now, I think it's a fine line that they have to strike. I think they are doing, by and large, a good job. In terms of the sanctions level, they've far exceeded kind of what I anticipated. That they would actually go after. The Europeans, of course, you know, within NATO have also exceeded, I think, even more to many of our audience, what they've been willing to kind of do and kind of commit to, at least for now, in energy and other realms in terms of Russia and sanctions. Sanctions, of course, are problematic. Mm-hmm. They don't really solve problems. However, you know, they're going to hurt maybe some rich tycoons in Russia. These economic effects will then kind of spill down to the people in Russia. Mm-hmm. So they will be the ones who, of course, suffer the most from sanctions. So sanctions aren't a perfect weapon. The United States overuses them, I think, at this point. One reason they're not going to be that effective this time around is at least in the oil market, and they're unwilling to go there, and I think we'll get into those areas more later, but is that, you know, it's a tight oil market, so you just can't take too much Russian oil off the market. So I think, by and large, I've been pretty pleased with the pushback. Obviously, no one in the West really has a stomach for any kind of military engagement there, and it's important, I think, to leave this situation in such a place that can be resolved peacefully, and Russia and Ukraine both have a sense of way to kind of get out without escalating further. So, by and large, I've been happy with it.
I see. So let's come to energy then. The crisis has clearly shown Europe's huge energy dependence on Russia, first of all, and that's why I think sanctions on energy came quite late than the other sanctions. So, but sanctions, as you also mentioned, not only hurt Russia, but also Europe too. What role do you think this energy dependence plays here, or how does energy shape politics in this conflict?
It's a loaded question, and it kind of gets to the heart of energy politics, I would say. You have, on the one hand, it is a dependence from both sides, actually. You know, the Europeans are dependent on Russian gas. They cannot transition to other fuels quickly. You're seeing some readoption of coal during this period, and you've seen that in the last couple of years during, since early 2021, when we've had kind of rising and volatile energy markets. so on the one hand, they cannot pivot right away from just, they pledged to get rid of 2/3 of Russian imports of gas, for instance. Whether they can meet that is impossible to predict. It's very ambitious. So the Europeans are dependent, but also the Russians are dependent as well for 70% of their exports of gas on the European market. So they have energy demand security issues, whereas the Europeans have energy supply security issues. So in what I've seen in my studies, and one thing that I've really noticed, fossil fuels have been incredibly economically valuable in building economies in the 20th century, in coal in the 19th century. And they've also been incredibly good at bridging and kind of linking countries, whether it's with pipelines or these kinds of situations with Russia, for instance. You need to invest a lot of money to be able to trust that the other person is going to use their gas. So it builds trust, gas particularly. I mean, the Russians have been delivering gas to the Europeans since the late 1960s. And this has been a big part, I think, about the last several decades of kind of building up common markets and economies. So I would say that these linkages are helping to de-escalate the conflict. Fossil fuels, of course, are very bad for our planet. I think we all know that. But in this regard, in terms of politics, there are exceptions. It's not always that they build bridges between countries. They can be used as swords against someone you don't like, or you cut off a pipeline to hurt a rival. But by and large, I think in this case, it is helping to de-escalate the crisis.
Is there a way Europe can totally end its energy dependence on Russia, John, after the war, hopefully soon? Do you think these sanctions will be gone, or this shift will remain permanent and change the global energy dynamics for good?
I think that there were sanctions on Russia after 2014, after their Crimean annexation, and we'll kind of go back, at least in terms of sanctions, somewhere between that and what has been kind of pledged in the last few weeks. Whether the Europeans can meet these short-term goals as they have set out, again, 2/3 to reduce their imports of Russian gas by 2/3 requires a lot of hurdles to go over, and so I don't know if they can do it now. Does this indicate a permanent shift in kind of the energy system? I think was the other part of your question. That is really up to debate. Can they get off of Russia entirely? Absolutely not in the short term. 5 to 6 years, certainly not. You would need, and maybe 3 to 5 years, if I could revise that a bit. You just need so many new investments in abilities, either in pipelines, bringing new supplies, or in new alternatives to gas, or LNG facilities, importing, and these things. So that level of investment is just hard to see at this point. And I think going forward, at least the rest of this decade, they're going to be trading energy with Russia. I don't see how that changes.
I see. So at this point, then I will ask you the alternatives, because many alternative solutions are on the table. Importing countries are seeking different energy sources, mainly in the GCC, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and of course other OPEC producers. And I think LNG is one solution, but not in a short term, it seems. So what are the challenges ahead, do you think, like political, economic, and logistical challenges for each alternative you mentioned?
There are, I would say, the logistical/commercial challenges are the largest. To build new pipelines requires a lot of investment from the private sector usually. Just that has to say, okay, we believe that this pipeline is going to pay off. Take, for instance, in Spain. Okay, they have LNG import terminals, but they have a limited capacity to pipe gas from Spain to other countries in Europe, and so you can import. There's just capacity to import more LNG there, but then you can't get it throughout the continent. So you have to build more pipelines, right? let's add into that the other layer that everyone's concerned about, rightfully so, about the environment, right, and climate change. So that risk is very much weighing on oil companies. As, you know, they owe their allegiance to their shareholders, and they're not going to invest in things that are potentially going to be either dead assets or not wanted in 5 or 10 years. You know, yes, this crisis is saying, okay, you know, prices are high. Europe needs more gas, but if you're, you know, CEO of an oil company or oil and gas company, are you really going to say, okay, yes, we're going to bet now that things will stay this way in 5 years, our investment will pay off? So the kind of commercial and logistical ones are really the strains. Of course, demand is set to rise, particularly in gas. You know, Asia is kind of the center of that growth expectation. Politically, it's interesting. I think, you know, you've seen a lot of new movements in the last few weeks. The Americans are reaching out to the Iranians, the Venezuelans. You know, this is about trying to get more oil on the market. And so, you know, politically, when it comes to energy, those boundaries can fall down pretty quickly. As long as a project makes sense, it's commercial, countries will kind of look the other way. There are so many examples, obviously, Russia and Europe, Iran and Turkey are rivals, but they trade in gas. I mean, these examples exist all over the world. So it's the commercial and logistical ones, and the willingness to find companies to invest. That is the big hurdle, I would say.
I will come to Turkey, John, but since now we just mentioned, and also I want to ask about Iran, because additional supply could also come from Iran if the US and its allies ease sanctions. And I think Russian invasion of Ukraine has made an agreement with Iran, both more urgent and more difficult to get, because there are some new complications now. Russia has some demands. And do you think this current crisis can be a good opportunity for Iran? And how do you see this urgent demand for energy now could shape future talks with Tehran?
It could. I'm skeptical that it will be more than just kind of a, you know, I mean, Iran is producing about, I think, 1 million, 1.5 million barrels a day at the moment. At its peak, it was 3 to 4 million. If it kind of all the floodgates start opening, it'll take time for it to all come out. It's not a huge difference maker. It would be kind of a shot in the arm to the global economy. So whether that oil comes on the market, it's not a game changer.
I see.
Yeah. But I will say that the market has changed dramatically. You know, when sanctions were first placed on Iran in, I believe, 2012, and then snapped back when Trump withdrew from the agreement, the market was very oversupplied with oil. There was just plenty of oil in the market, but now it's tight. Right. We don't have that extra supply. So if they can bring Iran back onto the market, they're going to be less reluctant to sanction Iranian oil because they do need it. So it does this whole context helps the Iranians and from their kind of bargaining position, I would say.
So let's come to Turkey then, because Turkey also plays a critical role here, I think, in shaping Europe's energy future. With Eastern Mediterranean on focus particularly. And this was, I think, very obvious during the recent visits by leaders of Greece, Israel and Germany recently. So how do you see Turkey's role in energy geopolitics, John?
I think your audience probably knows it's very important geographically. It has several routes going through it. You know, it's important for the transit of Russian energy, of Middle East energy, Caspian Sea energy. You know, all these geographies need to kind of funnel through here. In terms of, you know, there's Eastern Mediterranean gas. That's kind of the big political question. You know, those visits are encouraging. As I said earlier, you know, a commercial project that makes sense between Israel, Turkey, Greece, and that's a win for the European Union as well. That just makes sense. And it's made sense, quite frankly, for over 10 years.
Yeah, I will ask you that specifically, EastMed project, because, you know, this joint gas pipeline project carrying Israeli gas from Eastern Mediterranean all the way to Europe.
Yeah.
Effectively collapsed after the US withdrew its support. So I was gonna ask you first, why did the US change its position in the first place? Could you please tell us a few insights on this topic first? And then second, do you think now things might change the calculations, the previous calculations, because previously Turkey was excluded, you know? So now you think the project can be revived again with Turkey included this time?
Well, the geography of that project was such that it had to run under the Mediterranean for a long way. It was going to be very expensive. Most all analysts kind of agreed that it just didn't make sense because Europe had plenty of gas. Now, okay, Europe needs the gas, so that makes sense. But still, I don't see, given basically how Turkey, and others, I mean, it became this whole cauldron in the Eastern Mediterranean of outside interest, trying to kind of either block the pipeline or support it. That geography of the original Eastern Mediterranean pipeline would be rejuvenated, right? But, some version would have to be rejuvenated, I think, with Turkey only. I think that's the only way forward. A pipeline from Israel to Turkey has long made sense, as I mentioned earlier. And then, of course, that one feeds right into Greece, across Thrace, and on into Europe. And Turkey has a large enough market to handle that gas. Not all of it, but it can consume some, give it gas security, and help Europe's gas security as well. So the project kind of always made sense. Whether the politics will get there now, we'll see.
So from the U.S.
From the U.S. perspective, sorry, I guess I didn't touch on that. I think the big change there was that Chevron bought a huge stake in the Israeli fields. So they're kind of the big players now in the East Med, whereas before it was a consortium. And so, it's going to be kind of Chevron's decision at the end of the day, whether to invest in some kind of pipeline that they think makes sense economically. So I would read U.S. kind of support or lack of support for a pipeline in the Eastern Mediterranean as Chevron's calculations of what it wants to do with the gas in Israel. If you are Chevron, if I were in their boardroom, what I would want, and I'm sure they understand this as well, is I would want as many outlets as possible for my gas, because there's plenty there. So you want to have as many markets that you can reach, right? So they're already connected with Egypt. They're sending gas to Jordan, up into Lebanon and these areas. So if you can then start a pipeline to Europe, you have different markets that you can sell into the same gas. That gives you, the owner, a market advantage. So I would imagine they're strongly considering it now. So that's the big change that I think has happened. But I would also, it does seem that they want to include Turkey in this now, whereas before it was kind of, this East Mediterranean gas forum that was trying to do things without Turkey, right? So maybe they realize that's kind of foolish. We should probably bring in our neighbor who has actually a huge demand for gas into the project. And if they can use that geography, then potentially everyone can win. I mean, Cyprus could be brought into it. It has good potential that way. Again, fossil fuels can bring countries together.
So this energy geopolitics and energy demand can also help countries to ease
political tension.
Political
I mean,
tension
everyone wants to make money, so it can bring people together in that way. One thing I wanted to mention, though, too, with Turkey, we were talking about earlier, the Black Sea has become incredibly important. And their discovery there, which, from all reports I read, that they plan to bring online by next year, that to me is actually critically important because of the geography of Turk Stream from Russia and Ukraine, and these new pipeline links that have been made in Eastern Europe. So, the Black Sea is shaping up to be a very kind of interesting area, I would say, going forward. And I think Ukraine is about all kinds of things. I'm not going to try to guess or sum that up, but the gas question in the Black Sea, and now with Turkey's discovery there, makes it more interesting, even more important, Turkey to kind of world energy geopolitics.
So
let's say.
from now on, after the war is also over, hopefully soon, you think Turkey will be even more critical in the energy market and
I do.
geopolitics?
Yeah, I don't see how that changes. I mean, obviously the geography doesn't change, but with both East Med and Black Sea, Europe's demand for energy, for gas, particularly, these are the obvious alternatives. Yes, there's LNG. They can get more of that from the United States or maybe Senegal, or there are all kinds of new LNG projects. Qatar is coming online. But, this makes the most economic sense.
I see. So, John, we have 5 minutes left, and I want to also talk about clean energy transition, because I know that you also like this topic. So investment in sustainable energy is not the #1 agenda now. It's not on the agenda because of the crisis maybe. And some people think that this crisis between Russia and Ukraine, this war, might speed up this transition process. Others believe that this can have a negative impact on clean energy transition because in a rush to replace Russian gas, the European Union has damaged its own climate change strategy. Do you agree? What do you think about this future of clean energy transition? You think this process can boost this or the opposite?
Well, I guess I don't think one way or the other at the end of the day because I don't know is my cop-out of an answer because no one knows how fast this is going to go. But I can try to lay out the factors that I think matter. When it comes to Europe has the largest will to go green in energy, let's say. It's leading the world in kind of its policies, its Green Deal, it's trying to decarbonize its economy quickly. That's impressive, but then when reality and a crisis happens, the people need energy. That's a political problem. So, at the moment they're going to coal even to kind of get through this crisis. Gas prices remain very high. That's very, damaging to kind of political will. In terms of building out more renewable power, you can do that, and increasingly, wind and solar are cheaper than even coal. So commercially, it makes sense even for countries to invest in these technologies. The concern, and we even have the technologies to kind of digitalize the grid so that we don't have to rely on kind of traditional batteries where we just, got to store all the power and then distribute it. Technology is changing. We have the ways to do it, but it involves, again, so much investment and with uncertainty about markets that, to actually implement these things, it requires will. There's kind of some people think that you need policy, you need kind of fiscal stimulants, incentives from governments to will these new technologies become a greater part of our system. Others think it'll just be technology and the markets will take care of everything. Well, in my experience as a historian, what I've seen, that does not, the latter view is kind of wishful thinking. I've studied the coal and the transition from coal to oil, and maybe this is a good way of kind of answering your question. That transition took place at a very volatile time in global politics between World War I and World War II. Essentially, that ended. The transition started with the First World War as countries adopted oil for their navies. World War II kind of finished it off. America was very strong in oil and such. So right now I think we're living through another period of very dramatic volatility in politics and in energy. So watching how this plays out, you have China on the one hand, who is clearly winning the race for green technologies. They produce far more solar panels and wind turbines and electric vehicles, nuclear power generation stations than the West. So, to the extent that the world energy system, let's say, goes green, goes toward the technologies that China is the champion of, actually, that will determine, to some extent, kind of global politics. You know, that doesn't force it, but these things are happening at the same time for a reason. And so we'll have to see kind of how that plays out, and I can't predict that. Many countries have, pledges to be carbon neutral by the United States is 2050, China is 2060.
Yeah.
We have a long ways to go. It's going to be volatile, especially with energy, and we'll just have to kind of see how long it takes. But I can't predict for you.
Fair enough. Thank you very much John. Çok teşekkür ederim.
Çok mersi. Sağ ol.
Evet, Saat Farkı'nı bu haftada böyle noktalamış olduk. Dr. Bowlus bizlerleydi. Türkiye'de yaşayan Amerikalı enerji uzmanı. Kadir Has Üniversitesi'nde şu an araştırmalarına devam ediyor. Rusya-Ukrayna savaşının enerji alanındaki yansımalarını konuştuk kendisiyle. Önümüzdeki hafta yine farklı bir konuyla, farklı bir konukla görüşmek üzere. Hoşçakalın.